You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch UK Radio.
Good evening, everybody. How are we? Sorry we're a little bit later than the norm for your weekly history shot in the arm, I suppose. It's completely out of my control circumstances that we couldn't get into the studio until 9:30, but we're here. Still love you, and got a really good show to play out for you tonight. I will say before I do my little intro, it is a pre-record because Mr. Estep is a little bit busy tonight, so unfortunately he couldn't come live with us, unfortunately. But I'm sure, if you pardon the pun, he's going to be there, in spirit, and will be listening to us. And you never know, he might even make an appearance in the chat room if we're lucky. Depends if he's off on his new investigation. So I will say this is a pre-record, but doesn't mean that. Hi Richard, it doesn't mean that you won't hopefully enjoy some of the stuff I've got to say to you, or we've got to say to you. So, what's been occurring? Well, for me, not a lot. I'm still under, in effect, house arrest. I've still got the broken ankle and I'm still having to rest it, and it's every so often I'm using it a bit more than I probably should, and it's yelling at me as a result. So I'm trying to take it easy. I'm trying to rest as much as I can, but most of you probably know, for me, it's not easy, and secondly, I've got 2 young kids, so it's pretty much impossible, but I'm doing my best. But I have got a very exciting thing this Saturday. I'm off to Bosworth Hall, the place that the guys from Haunted Live, do quite a lot of their investigations. I'm a special guest at the sort of celebratory launch party, because it's already been launched, but the party to celebrate the relaunch, I suppose you could say, of the Osborne book, The World of the Unknown Ghosts. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'll be there on Saturday, so if you are going to be there, come over and say hello. I'd love to meet you. Let me know who you are, because unfortunately we don't always know what people look like, do we, during these darned radio shows. But I know there's going to be loads of people there, so I'm really looking forward to that. And we're going to be getting a screening of the new Borley Rectory film as well, which should be really exciting. Tomorrow night, before I forget, hi SJ, tomorrow night, before I forget, the PSH radio show has got an amazing guest on it. She is the queen of Ouija boards. It's Karen Dolman and shit. And if she lets rip on air, you'll know why I've said that. This woman has got levels of energy and is just a gorgeous, gorgeous soul. Gorgeous, gorgeous soul. So do make sure, in case I forget to say while I'm doing my interview with Richard, do make sure to listen to the PSH radio show tomorrow night as well. Well, last week I had on my brother from another mother, Mr. Ryan Griffiths. I hope those of you who tuned into the show on the Shetlands enjoyed that. I must admit, it was great fun to do, as it always is with Rye. And if you didn't get to listen to it, don't worry, you can head on over to our YouTube channel, which make sure you click like, share and subscribe so we know that you want to listen to more stuff, or just listen to it on Spreaker. So, because I've got a good hour's worth of my chat with Richard to play out to you, I am going to shut up now and play the interview. Enjoy! Okay, so I did tell you last week that my guest this week was a good friend of mine who you all know. I was lucky enough to investigate Bob in jail with him earlier this year. This guy, I'm sure he's got wings on his feet at the moment, because basically his arse ain't touching the ground unless it's an aeroplane seat. It's the wonderful Mr. Richard Estep. How you doing, Rich?
Hey, Penny. Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me back on. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you, my love. I'm all right. You've been a bit busy, or you are a bit busy at the moment, aren't you?
Well, October's the busiest month for pretty much everybody that does what we all do, right? I'm sure your listeners are the same way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been keeping busy.
So what have you got coming up over the next few weeks?
Next week, I'm moving into the Old South Pittsburgh Hospital in Tennessee to take that over for a week and research the hauntings there. Mm-hmm. Looking forward to that. I've heard some very good things about that location.
Have you been there before?
Never been there before.
There is a green sofa there. I presume it's still there. You've got to take a photo of yourself sitting on that green sofa.
Is there a tradition or something I don't know about with this?
It should be a tradition. Every group I know who's been there does it. So even if you just do it and send it to me, Richard, it will mean that, I'm hoping it's still there because it's quite iconic. There's quite a few very arty pictures of this green sofa in like the break room type area. It's a bit decrepit, a bit kind of you probably want to disinfect your backside after getting off it. But yeah, I think it should be. I know that I think it was Three Girls in the Dark were trying to make it a thing, and they got their friends who were there, like Apex and all of those, to do it as well. So there you go.
But you're saying it's kind of old, dirty, and decrepit.
Bit
We're
like
going to
us.
get on like a house on
Bit
fire.
like us, yeah.
Sometimes the jokes write themselves, don't they?
They do, don't they? They do that. I hand them to you, and you can just knock it out of the park.
Thanks for the low-hanging fruit there.
So you're doing OSPH.
And then it's back. Yeah, and then it's back to my favourite haunt, Asylum 49 for Halloween.
Oh, that's a nice little segue into what we're going to be talking about, because I was going to mention one of the owners of that when we started talking.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'll be going with my usual crew, and Wes from the Canadian Correction Officers Paranormal Society will be coming.
Cuddly Teddy Bear Wes is going.
Yes, he is. I just saw him last week. We were shooting. Morgan Knudsen and I were shooting Paranormal 911 in Toronto, and Wes took us to a haunted restaurant. It was terrific. I
saw the photos. You guys look like a crew. I must admit, you did look like you could be a crew.
I think we should do more stuff together. Like, it's one of those things we always talk about. You find your tribe, right? Your listeners are your tribe, and mine too, and so are these guys.
No, I've not had the chance to meet Morgan, obviously. But obviously I know Wes, and when he was listening to my show I did last week with my brother from another mother, Ryan Griffiths, he was messaging me saying, when can we go to the Shetlands? I want to investigate the Shetlands with you. And I was like, okay, Wes, we'll sort it, but it's a bit of a bugger to get to, mate. But yeah, we'll sort it. So yeah, he's but hopefully I should be getting over to Canada next year. It's in May, I think we're planning it to do some investigations with him anyway over there. So should be good. You never know, I might turn up on your doorstep in Colorado at some point.
You never know. Stranger things have happened. You know I've moved to Kansas, right?
I'll find you, Mr. Estep. So, well, it sounds really exciting. I bet Wes is looking forward to Asylum 49 then, isn't he?
You know, he is. It's a full contact haunted house, so I'm sure he's going to be... He throws people around all day for a living.
He does.
So, allegedly. So I'm sure that he's going to fit in like a...
you're going to do all the dressing up and jumping out at people and all that thing?
You know,
make someone wet themselves?
Halloween night is always my favourite night to be there, because there's just that... It was the best holiday ever, isn't it? But that's when the place is most paranormally active, and I'm doing a fundraiser with author Troy Taylor, organised by fellow author April Slaughter. We're doing a fundraiser for the Make-A-Wish Foundation on Halloween night in the haunt itself.
Brilliant.
And when that's done, we go researching ourselves. So
awesome, isn't it? Asylum 49 that has the if you wet yourself you get money or something.
If you soil
yourself.
I would be loaded if that were the case. It's any of the employees that any of the actors that make a customer soil themselves get a spot prize, $50 in cash.
That's it.
So I think it's a very enlightened style of management. I watched it happen. I watched a guy dressed as a banana, and I've never seen a banana brown so quickly.
I love it. I do. I mean, I say Cammy. Obviously, Cammy Anderson. I've spoken to her, as you know, on a few occasions, and I just love her outlook. But that's just, I love that.
I adore Cammy. Literally the nicest human being I've ever met.
She is. A lot of time for her. Which does actually bring me on to what we're going to be talking about. Now, you're being your same old Richard. You've got books flying out left, right, and centre, and in fact, you've got one coming out very, very soon, which I'm going to be interested to read about how to basically write.
I wanted to write a book about. A lot of people come up to me and say, you know, I love that you have so many books out. I've always wanted to do that, but I don't have the time. I can't write. one of 100 reasons why they can't do it. And of course, you and I had these conversations, and you miraculously were able to beat down all the barriers and do it yourself and keep doing it. And so it's not actually all that difficult to do, as long as you are properly motivated and kind of know where to start. So I wanted to help people. I wanted a more concrete answer for people than, just write a lot. I wanted to write a guide. So it primarily focuses on the paranormal genre, but it works for any type of book publishing, writing and publishing, and that comes out next month.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Looking forward to reading it.
It's in the hands of Mr. Aaron Sagers right now as he's working on the foreword.
Oh, he's doing... I was going to ask who is doing the foreword for this. It's a good job you've got so many friends, isn't it? Because you're so prolific with your book writing, and you have to pick someone to write the foreword for each book.
I really like finding the right person to write the foreword. So for Bodmin Jail, you were perfect. The book's called Building the Right Life, right with a W, R-I-T-E. And so Aaron, who runs... and it just flew right out of my head, but it's paranormal pop culture, that's it.
Yeah.
He's written his dream life, and he's now a guy that stalks movie sets and is also a skilled paranormal investigator, and he's written his way, I think, to...
And a good writer as well.
Heck of a writer.
The stuff he writes, I love his style of writing. I'll say I love Aaron as well. I've got a lot of time for him. He's damn, he's got a sexy voice on air.
I can't say I've noticed. He and I have a bit of a bromance, but I can't say I've noticed.
No, he hasn't. I did tell him that after the last show he did with me. I did say that I could just listen to him talk because his voice. Kerry feels the same way about it, although I probably shouldn't say that. But we've all sort of said. But then again, Kerry's got a thing about your voice as well, Rich. So, but yeah, Aaron's...
Hi, Kerry. Love you, Kerry.
Yeah, Daryl, don't listen. Kerry, Aaron, I have got a thing about Aaron's voice, but then again, I've got a thing about Chris from Tennessee Wraith Chaser's voice as well, especially when he calls me ma'am in that southern sort of accent. And they all know that because I think Dalen does it from the tent. They all know that when they call me ma'am in those American accents and make it really sort of the drawl, they know I sort of go on the end of the mic, and they do it on purpose. I know it.
I'm sure they do.
In fact, I think your friend Jason has done it as well.
No, that's just Jason. I can confidently state that he's a very polite kind of dude. So he's very much a sir, ma'am, and so are his kids. So. But
he found out that American accent calling me ma'am. After I did that show with you guys, he sent me messages just saying yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I was like, oh, you're doing that on purpose. And he was giggling. He was writing giggly emojis after it. So,
I didn't think he was a giggler, but his wife Linda said. His wife Linda said yesterday she made him giggle like a girl was her quote. So I'm demanding that she record it next time to give us some proof.
No, he thought it was hilarious sending me all these ma'am quotes.
Well, he's moving into Old South Pittsburgh with me next week for 4 days.
Is Linda going as well?
I don't think she is because they have a kiddo to look after. And Linda's working hellaciously hard, I think, in this month. So big shout out to Linda because even when she's not with us, she's with us in spirit, no pun intended.
Oh, I do like those guys. I've got a lot of time for those guys as well. I've got a lot of time for a lot of people, really. But, yes, they're gorgeous. Gorgeous people. But, yes, so Aaron's writing. Okay, so the book we're going to be talking about, and just out of interest, seeing as, a very talented British author wrote the foreword for you for Bodmin, when's that coming out?
And Cammy wrote the foreword for Fox Hollow, by the way.
I know she did. I was going to come on to that next.
Gotcha. So Bodmin, the way that I'm finishing my books right now, my next book to be finished is going to be the Gacy book, which will be out in November. Cool. Bodmin, I'm hoping to have out and released on the stroke of midnight, New Year's Eve to New Year's Day.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. And it's been such a great book to write and revisit. It takes me hours to go over all the audio from when we were having these adventures. It's not the writing that takes time.
It's the researching.
It is, and it's also fun to relive it because instantly I put on the headphones and I'm back in the dark with a whole bunch of investigators, and I forget almost what a good time we had.
There were quite a few laughs, if I remember rightly, and what I've really enjoyed about it is the people I've got to know because of it. People like Gaynor and Leslie and Stephen and Jill.
Oh, the paranormal slags.
The paranormal slags, yeah. And obviously getting to know Wes better because of the fact that I was giving him a lift. We met up because we were staying at the same, sounds rude, but not. We were staying at the same hotel. And, it's. I think it's one of those things that it just shows when people come together, they do find they're of a like mind and they meet other like-minded I mean, Gaynor and I are supposed to be doing something here at some point when I get the dates arranged. So it's just good to sort of meet other people, and you know, you're a bit of a matchmaker in that respect.
I love opening doors for people. I really do. And you know, I think we had MJ come along with us, and then she put Bodmin on telly.
Yeah,
we
she did.
We met Kirsten the first year, and Kirsten allowed me to bring people back.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the same way, like, I find that this doesn't have to be a competition.
It doesn't. No, I agree.
You know, if it is, you're doing it kind of wrong. We can all win. From a slightly cynical point of view, everybody I meet, I was saying this to Jason the other week, they're a character in my story. They just happen to be real people. And I always like adding to that cast of characters. So when I have good people, I like to bring them along. And so beware if you meet me, because you may well end up getting written about.
Anytime, Richard, anytime. And I'll be disappointed if there's not some mention of the squatting in Bodmin book.
Oh, there'll be something, I'm sure.
So, the book we're actually going to be talking about tonight is one that, when you told me you were writing it, I was thinking, wow. Okay, because it's quite a modern case, really, isn't it? Really. And the reason I was mentioning Cami is I was rereading the book the other night, and I was rereading her foreword, and I don't mean this to sound condescending, I forgot what a good writer she was, because reading
I know
that
exactly
foreword,
what you mean.
It was superb. And I also didn't realise what her background was in criminology and criminal psychology, and the story, the book we're talking about is Richard's book on Fox Hollow Grange. Or Fox Hollow Farm, sorry. And we're going to talk about people who don't know what murders that's associated with. We'll talk about that in a minute. But some of the statistics that Cami put into her foreword, I was kind of writing them down because I thought they were quite important. The fact that 1 in 3 homicides, murders, whatever you want to call it, is unsolved and will always be a cold case. The fact that the National Crime Information Centre in 2017 had reported 600,000 people missing, which is it's a scary statistic. I don't know what the UK equivalent is, but that's, you know, scary. And the fact that there was, in that year alone, there was 900 unidentified remains. Not individual bones, but different...
Found, and that's what was found.
Yeah. And
as opposed to what's out there.
And when people sort of say, well, I mean, the murderer that we're talking about is Herb Baumeister. And when people sort of say to you, well, how could a murderer get away with killing all these people and nobody reporting them missing? Those statistics, in my view, tell you how. And like I say, when you told me you were going to be going to this, I think we spoke actually a first time after you'd visited this place, and you were telling me about the swimming pool. And I'd seen it on sort of Ghost Adventures. I know a few crews that have been investigated Fox Hollow as well. And I was kind of excited for you writing the book, but also, if I'm honest, Richard, a little bit nervous for you as well, because to me it's such a fresh case. I mean, in fact, it only really, what was it, 1991 he killed himself? Was it 1991? Something like that, wasn't it? So
it was later than that. Herb died in, I want to say 1996, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But still, you're looking at the 1990s.
The 1990s. And I was kind of worried for you, because I thought, well, that energy there must be pretty fresh. What?
It was interesting. We brought a couple of mediums in, and one of them, who I'd never met before but came highly recommended, he walked into the house. A great guy, Brian Sanders, looks like an NFL linebacker, the least medium-looking guy that you can imagine. You know, he did not look at all like Barry John, the James Bond of British mediums.
And Barry's gonna love that analogy.
Shout out to Barry. We love Barry.
We love Barry.
And he said, "How do you all even sit in this room?" And I wasn't feeling anything. I mean, I'm not sensitive in that way, but he was immediately affected.
Yeah. Well, you and I have had that discussion before. I think when we were at Bodmin, we had that discussion that you said, you know, you're about as sensitive as a brick. When I was saying, I don't like it in here, something's watching me, I can feel it. And you'd be like, what do you mean you can feel it? And I'd be like, I can feel I'm being watched. And it was really strange.
I think you even squatted defensively, didn't you?
Oh, very probably, yes. Showing off my leg muscles in hope that it would scare the spirit off. Yeah, got to show the quads off somehow. But with Fox Hollow, I mean, you said in the book when you first drove up to it, the first thing you thought of, this is where horror stories are written.
Well, and to be fair, it was a dark and stormy night. Like, I could have started the book like that and been honest. The place was absolutely, it was thunder, it was lightning. We missed the entrance because it was that kind of night where you can't see the rain in front of you. So, that was the British kid that watched too many Hammer horror movies, if you can indeed watch too many Hammer horror movies, speaking. But it did kind of presage what we would go on to experience.
Yeah. So we'll talk about Herb Baumeister, and I'm not going to glamorise what he did. He was, well, pardon my French, he was a piece of shit. Anyone who does anything like that, in my view, is a piece of shit. However, looking at his history, he was born in April 1947 in Indianapolis, and some of the signs from his early years, if you like, did infer that he was not quite right in the head, I suppose you could put it. The fact that he's meant to have put a dead crow on his teacher's desk. He's also isn't he meant to have urinated on his teacher's desk as well?
That's true.
Yep, his dad had him...
I'm sorry, not his teacher's desk. I believe it was his boss's desk at the DMV.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
Either way, the desk slashing, as our English friends would say, is key.
Yeah. He was old enough to know better, shall we say. He wasn't a 5-year-old kid having an accident in a classroom, put it that way, which 5-year-old kids do have. His dad got him tested, psychologically, mentally tested, and he was diagnosed as a schizophrenic. But nothing really ever happened.
Well, he was institutionalised for a brief period as well.
Yes, his wife got him. She was worried, wasn't she? And she got him institutionalised, but that was a bit further down the line. So, if you follow the whole sort of the whole stereotypical they're going to be a serial killer thing, we don't know if this dead crow, he killed it to put it on his teacher's desk. I was looking that bit up because that's supposed to be one of the warning signs, isn't it, for a future serial harming animals and stuff. I think it was Jeffrey Dahmer, his father in the book he wrote about Dahmer said that was one of the first things he ever found him doing. I think it was a cat, the village cat, the town cat or some street cat or whatever it was. He found him trying to kill it. But whether that's the case with Baumeister or not, when you look at him, he looks a pretty innocuous, bit creepy, but quite a sort of plain and blend into the background kind of person. The fact, though, his nickname was Weird Herb. But so we've got that. We've got this brilliant forward by Cami, and then you go to start introducing us to... You mentioned about characters in your books. You start introducing us to the main characters, and one of these main characters is a chap who... He sounds lovely. Rob Graves, who is now the co-owner with his wife, I believe, or was.
As I've had to call him at every interview, the unfortunately named Rob Graves. Because I've honestly been asked, is that a pseudonym for this kind of book? It would be immensely bad taste if it were.
It was, wouldn't it? Now, do the Graves still own the property?
They do. They do. Rob and his wife, Vicky, do still own Fox Hollow Farm, and they're very rational, scientific people. Rob is a coroner who does autopsies. He's also a car dealer.
Right. And, I can see the link.
and Vicky works in the field of medical research. So, they're very rational people. And when they bought this house, they got a deal on the house, although it's still wickedly expensive. And they said, we've seen this place on the news. It's where all those murders happened. Are we okay living here? I don't think I would be. You want to talk about brave? When they go on vacation, they have a house sitter, house sitter, pet watcher who moves in on her own. And I'm like, she is... I want to meet her. I never got around to it. This has to be the bravest woman you could ever
Possibly, the fact she was female makes her safer than if it was a young man.
I'm just talking about the general creep factor.
Okay. But one of the things you put in your book, or I think you put it in that Robert said it, was that the first that him and his wife were horse people. And they said anyone who's a horse person will know what we mean by we're horse people. Now, I knew exactly what they meant because I'm a horse person. And
you do sound a bit hoarse today. Are you coming down with something?
I think I'm coming down with yet another cold, but thank you for noticing. I'm surprised you didn't say, so why the long face? But I understand what they meant about, you see this land, you see this amazing property and everything else, and you just think, wow, what we could do with this to, build on our hobby. And I kind of understood that. The minute he said it were horse people, because horse people know horse people. But horses in the four-legged variety, not the variety. So I kind of understood what he meant. But his whole demeanour, the way, the writing, and did you kind of interview him for those bits, or did you say, this is what I want you to write about, and he sent you?
No, Rob wrote his section of the book, and I wanted him to tell. I can paraphrase, but why when I can get it straight from the horse's mouth? See what I did there?
Very good, very good.
I wanted him to tell his story his way, and he said, we are horse people, and that's right. That's exactly what he did. Yeah. So, and I think he came across very well. He's a very erudite man, very educated, very literate, and immensely skeptical. Rob. I talked to him about, and he said, you write about the hauntings, because that's your wheelhouse. I'll write about the murders and the history of Fox Hollow, because it's become kind of his life's fascination. He sleeps in Herb Baumeister's bedroom. He writes in his office. In fact, his chunk of the book was written in Herb Baumeister's library and office, on the same desk that Herb would have used.
Okay.
So he's the expert there, but yeah.
No, I liked him. I like how he comes across. He's someone I'd love to meet at some point. He seemed a very, like you say, erudite and well spoken, and I enjoyed reading the bits that he'd. Obviously, I enjoy your bits as well, Rich, but I really enjoyed reading because I could see the difference in the way it was worded to yours, and it was very interesting in reading it, like you say, for first hand from someone who was actually living, breathing, working it, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're a historian. It's all about the primary sources. If they're available, you use them, right?
Definitely. Love to get hold of a primary source. Now, there's a couple more names that were mentioned. I'm not going to mention all of Baumeister's victims because there's quite a lot, but they're all relatively young men, and there's the parallel between he started off being known as the I-70 Strangler. Interstate. Interstate, does that stand for? Interstate?
It does, and he didn't start out that way, but I can see why you said that. So they actually gave him that label after they made the discoveries at Fox Hollow Farm. So after Herb murdered a whole bunch of men at Fox Hollow Farm, they did some checking, and lo and behold, there were all of these murders that took place along the interstate, which it must be pointed out that Herb's wife did cooperate with the police and looked at phone records and travel records, and lo and behold, they matched with business trips that Herb had taken along that Interstate 70 corridor. So for English listeners, I-70 is the same as M1 or M22 or something.
Brilliant, thank you. So there's all these murders. They think there was about 12 or 13 men were discovered at the side of this interstate. And in 1991, these road murders, I'll call them, stopped. But what that actually ties in with is when they moved into Fox Hollow, roughly. Yeah,
that's right, and it's kind of interesting. Serial killers, generally, it's a risky thing to do, isn't it? Serial murder. So a lot of it, I think, was Herb killing away from where he lived at the time. He moved into this very spacious estate. Fox Hollow's 18 acres, surrounded by woods. Today, it's kind of in the middle of a neighborhood, but back then, you could walk around completely naked around the grounds of the house and never be seen by a living soul.
I hate to say that would be my perfect place. I'd love to live somewhere like that.
And so that was I think that was part of the appeal for him.
Yeah,
was that when his wife was away at the lake house with the kids, he had this grandiose location all to himself.
Yeah,
and that's when it was safer for him to bring victims home than to go out to remote spots of road.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to mention everything that's in the book because I want people to go out and buy it and read it, because the last thing I've picked out a few bits that I think I'd like to know more about, if that's all right with you, Richard.
Certainly.
Now, so we've got this is quite a well-known thing. Anyone who knows the story of Baumeister knows that he had 3 children, and his son, I think Eric, his name is, was off playing in the woods and found this skull and brought it back in on a stick to scare his sisters and stuff. And when Julie, Julie Baumeister questioned Herb about it, he said, "Oh, it was because his dad was I can never say it,
anesthesiologist."
That's the one. Yeah, was one of them. Said it was from his dad's medical career. It was his old anatomical skeleton that had obviously been stored and the dogs had got hold of and had scattered the pieces in the woods. I'm presuming his wife, being the believing kind and everything, sort of believed him and let it go. So, and that's a story that most people know, that every documentary or anything I've watched on the Baumeister case, that's one of the first stories they come up with. And it is quite horrifying that you think of your young son. I mean, I sort of picture if mine were playing in our woods and Sonny came in and said, "Look, Mum, I found this skull." And I'd be like, "Where'd you get that?" It's quite a horrifying thing to realise that this child found one of his dad's murder victims. But, kids play, kids find stuff, it happens, and his skeleton story was quite plausible. But something that I found very interesting is you mentioned a couple of the other characters, as we'll put it in the book, and one of them is a that's a Freudian slip, a guy by the name of Joe LeBlanc. Now, he moved into the property. Obviously, I've never been there, but from what I understand, you've got the main house, and then you've got an apartment over the garage.
Yeah, in Britain they would call it a granny annex, or in America an in-law house.
Okay.
Or in-law quarters. But yeah, think of it as basically a flatlet above the garage. It's got a bedroom. Mm-hmm. You know what? This is a British audience. I can go back to saying garage, which my wife mocks me for all the time. Above the garage, there's my Leicester coming out. And basically you've got this flat above the garage. And that's where, during his divorce, it said that Herb actually lived in there when he and his wife were becoming increasingly estranged.
Yeah.
And there's probably some significance to that based on the phenomenon that would occur later.
Well, you see, this is what I found very interesting. So, reading the book, you read about a lot of things that happened to this poor guy Joe. Although, by the sounds of it, when he came to visit you guys in the pump room and was antagonising Herb, I think he would have done okay for himself in a fist fight. But an awful lot of stuff started to happen in this annex. You had the door knocker going, and I remember reading an account. I'm not sure. I don't think it was you that wrote it. I think it was Rob wrote it from what Joe had told him. But he came out to find the door knocker that was a very heavy knocker, sort of almost in the air, and then suddenly slams down and goes up again. Yeah,
and it's still there. We tested it. It is still there.
Now, and he also had the door fling itself open, like the handle move and the door fling itself open. He had knives taken out of the knife block and then discovered knife marks on the walls. He saw a young man literally walk past him, and then when they were watching a program on Baumeister, that was one of Baumeister's victims. He recognised him. And it got me thinking, why was this part so prolific? And I thought maybe it's because Joe was a single young man.
He was a single young man of the same age as most of Herb's victims.
Okay. Now, obviously Herb chose gay men because they say he was bisexual, but according to his wife, they only had relations about 12 times in however many times they were married. So I would have said he wasn't actually bisexual. He was actually gay and did it because he felt he had to.
He also was not comfortable being seen naked by his wife.
Okay, so which is to me is a massive giveaway. He was gay, but he just didn't want to admit it.
Right.
Which for that I do actually feel sympathy, because I feel sympathy for anyone who can't be their true self in that respect. But he could have dealt with it a little better. So you've got a young single man living in this apartment, and it made me start to think that could it have been the apartment that Baumeister took a lot of these victims back to in the first place, rather than soiling the house?
No. At least.
Do you get why I'm thinking that, though?
Yeah, we don't think so. The vast majority of the murders, because he had an MO, the way that Herb would commit the murders was that Fox Hollow has this pool in the basement, and it's an incredible pool. Now, back then, rather creepily, he had it filled with mannequins who were posed and dressed as if there was a beach party going on.
Oh my gosh!
And he did not like to be alone, as the reason for this. But anyway, so he would before he would go out to gay bars of a weekend, he would turn the temperature on the pool up to maximum. And he would pull the cover across. So think of it kind of like simmering like a saucepan with the lid on. And then he would go out and he would, troll the gay bars and clubs of Indianapolis for victims. And once that was done, he would bring them back to the pool, and he would open the French windows to the French doors, to the night air, let the cold air in, roll the pool cover back, and this whole pool fills with steam. So you have such a disorienting environment, and you introduce drugs and drink to the mix. He would slip them some Mickey Fins, as they say, some pills, and would get them drunk and get them into the pool. So that was also his killing ground, for want of a better term.
Yeah.
That was where he preferred to practice.
Okay. Right. But
he also had video cameras hooked up to record the incidents. Those tapes all disappeared.
Ugh, quite scary. But so maybe Joe was experiencing so much activity because he would have been Herb's, I suppose, for want of a better word, type. He would have been his, age, gender, single, all of those kind of things. But I mean, Joe put up with it though, didn't he? He put up with, sort of started to meet it head on, didn't he? Really.
He did, and Joe is not a man who's easily frightened or intimidated. I would argue that in order to know the background of a place like Fox Hollow and to move in anyway, you have to be somewhat, you know what you're getting into, and not easily pushed around. So I met Joe, who was a very nice man, and not at all a victim-type person. He a very strong-willed chap. And when I stood next to him in the dark and he went toe-to-toe, outright yelling and raging at Herb Baumeister, this was no wallflower.
That's exactly what I thought when I read that bit. Now, you mentioned the pool, and like you say, a lot of the bits in the book are centred around the pool area, and I know that was one of the first things you and I talked about when you were telling me about your first, because I think when we first spoke about it, you'd only done your first investigation at Fox Hollow, and you were telling me you were going back, and you said that you got in the pool, and I must admit I do love your description, although I want to know how you managed to swim and hold a recorder above your head at the same time. I'm quite impressed with that, Richard.
And I traded out too for some meters, but the majority of the equipment was positioned around the pool, and I had my team all around the pool as well.
Yeah. And I do love the fact that Rob apologised for how cold it was, but said it cost too much to heat it, so, get on with it.
Yeah, like $1,000 a month to heat the pool, and he's, I love you, but not $1,000 a month. fair comment.
It is. And, if you read the book, there's even a photo of Richard in his shorts getting into the pool, so there you go for Richard's female fans, or male fans, whichever you...
I'd like to point out the camera adds £10. We have 13 cameras on me.
There is that. But, for all your fans, there is a picture of you in your shorts getting into the pool, looking a bit sort of like, as you're going down the steps.
It is my only topless picture I've ever put in a book.
Is it?
And then the guy that they had play me on Haunted Case Files when they filmed this, it's Paranormal Investigators in the UK, was like in great shape, and my wife's like, your stuntman should send him home one night instead.
I like Laura, I like Laura. But you decided to almost recreate a whole sort of 80s, 90s party scene, didn't you, in the pool house at one point? Now, the song that you put that you guys were playing, I wrote down, really? Next to it. I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor. Mm-hmm.
All right,
really?
now you say it does seem like bad taste.
First, I was afraid I was petrified.
It's actually never struck me until you just said it how massively bad taste that sounds.
Oh dear.
It had never crossed my mind. But we ended up going with. I met one of the one victim that had escaped, and he said that Herb's favorite song was Blue Bayou by Linda Ronstadt. So in addition to recreating a kind of lively disco scene suitable to that era, I made a point to play that as well, a bit of a mournful ballad, which supposedly was Herb's favorite song.
Well, we all know that triggers work. I mean, I do actually talk about music triggers in my next book, the one I'm finishing up on, and my music trigger was Whole Lot of Rosie by AC/DC. Got everything moving. So, whatever works. But I do understand why a song like I Will Survive would work if you were trying to create almost like a gay 80s, 90s party scene. I do get that, but I was reading it and I was like, wow. Okay.
I have truly never thought of that until you just said it. Now I'm horrified.
But it is a true gay icon song, so I do get where you mean it. But I'm sorry,
It's
Richard,
no
I did
worse
laugh.
It's no worse than teaching my EMT and paramedic students CPR to the beat of Staying Alive, because it's the perfect cadence.
It's very true.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you 101% on that one. It is very, very true. But so the music did actually start sparking off activity, didn't it? Unsurprisingly, it's a brilliant trigger to use. And as you were swimming, you were saying that nothing seemed to come up on the digitals. Nothing, you didn't get, because one of the stories, wasn't it? This who was it who said he felt hands around his neck? Wasn't it?
That was Joe.
He was swimming in the pool. Yeah, and tell the story, because it's quite. I don't like water anyway, as you know. So if that happened to me, I'd never go in there again.
Yeah, so Joe had been swimming in the pool with a friend of his, and also two of the Baumeister's boys. The Graves family boys. Yeah. And they were just hanging out, playing in the pool party. And Joe swims out to the deep end while they're playing like netball. There's a great big netball net across the pool. And he feels, as he's resting against the edge of the pool, a pair of hands around his neck as if he's being choked, and turns around to see who's doing it, thinking it's a practical joke, and there's nobody there. And then shortly after that, I picture this a lot like the scene from Jaws. He's pulled under the water as if someone's trying to drown him. And that's kind of his last straw at Fox Hollow. That's when he got truly angry.
So tell me, is Joe, I mean, obviously you're 6'1", 6'2", Rich? Is Joe tall and sort of...
No.
He's not?
No, Joe's a little shorter than I am, in decent shape, and... he's a little outdoorsy kind of dude from what I've seen.
Yeah.
But, he's not someone that you would push around easily.
Yeah. So it's not something that a young child could dive in and pull him down under the water anyway.
And plus, when he looked, everybody else was at the opposite end of the pool. There was no way physically they could have covered that distance. Yeah.
Like I say, with somebody who doesn't like water anyway, that would have stopped me ever going in a swimming pool ever again. That would terrify me. But
I mean, from my point of view, though, I've investigated 2 haunted swimming pools in my career. One of them at the Mineral Springs Hotel. It was a dry pool. I've never swum in a haunted pool before. How do you turn that down? I know that Zach didn't get in on Ghost Adventures.
Favouritism, eh, Richard? Yeah, there you go. Well, like I say, topless photo of Richard in the book. There you go. But you did have something that, when you recounted it in the book, what had happened, I must admit I felt a shiver go up my back. I really did. Because there was one word you heard on the recorders after the event, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, we'd had a growl in the pool and that kind of stuff, but the truly chilling thing was that we heard the word Laura, which, as you said, is my wife's name. And it was spoken as a male voice, it was spoken as a whisper. And there was no Laura connection to Fox Hollow Farm that I'm aware of. You haven't,
because that's one thing I started looking into to see if I could find anything. So see if I could find any of his victims, even maybe his most recent ones, like Stephen Hale and Alan Broussard and Roger Goodlett and all those, to see if I could find any relation to a Laura in any of their. And I couldn't find one. I couldn't find any to do with Baumeister. I couldn't find any to do with his wife. None of their kids' names. Because there was 2 girls.
A lot of it was in the inflection as well. It was whispered in a very creepy way. It wasn't somebody calling out for help it was a very intimidatory way. Maybe I'm biased. Maybe it's just the way that I chose to take it. But yeah, it was definitely a chilling moment.
But other people heard it on the recording.
Oh, everyone can. We didn't hear a word ourselves, but like most EVPs, you heard it on playback.
And was it Class A or Class B?
I would call it a lowercase Class A.
Okay. Now, one of the notes I wrote down to ask you, though, about that experience is, did you contact your lovely wife afterwards to say, did anything happen to you while I was away? Did you? I
asked her when we came back.
Right.
And no, nothing.
Nothing. Okay, so maybe it was almost like an empty threat.
I mean, maybe. It might have just been, I know the name of your loved one. I mean, I don't know.
That did send, out of all the things I've read that have happened to you, Richard, that probably sent the shivers up my spine the most, because it's such a sort of, bloody hell, it's like Big Brother's watching and we know everything about you sort of thing, and that to me was creepy. and quite sort of scary. But you mentioned about Joe going into the pump room and saying, basically saying, I'm going to galvanise the energy in here. Now, what I was interested in is I think it also inferred in there quite a lot happens in the pump room or around the area of the pump room. Could that be because it's I presume it's an electric or motorised type of pump? Could it be that creates, if you like, the spark or the battery power for the energies to do stuff?
I think you may well have hit the nail on the head there, but also it has a history as it relates to the murders. You want to talk about the scariest thing I heard about Fox Hollow? I'll tell you what I think it is. Rob works, as I told you, at a car dealership is his other job. And so a friend of his came over with his young daughter one day just to see the house. Now, with a young kid, nobody ever says, we're going over to Dad's friend's house where all those murders took place, right? This is a child.
Yeah.
And so they go down into the pool, and of course they're talking appropriately around children with hushed voices. And all of a sudden the girl said, shh. She said, Daddy, the men are trying to sleep in there. And she's pointing at the pump room.
Wow. Okay. How old is this child, do we know?
I don't know exactly. I'm going about 5-6 years of age. Certainly not a kid that could have known about the incidents that took place at Fox Hollow Farm.
Or read about it, or
read about
else.
it, yeah.
It is. I mean, they do say that children are so innocent that they can see and hear stuff that we've kind of conditioned ourselves not to be able to see and hear. They have that kind of naivety, don't they? And I know when both my sons have seen stuff that I'm just like, how did you know that? I'd never mentioned, like the experience that my youngest had at Langard Fort, in a room where the rumour was that a World War I soldier had been murdered. He went there, and it was during the day. Obviously, he can't cope with stuff like that because of his learning difficulties. He couldn't understand it. He would take it literally that if he walked in there, it meant he was going to be killed. So, of course, I don't tell him some of the stories. And he stood there, and we were in the room, and I'd backed out of it because I'd investigated it a few weeks beforehand and had this very strange experience in there. And then found out that this room was meant to be where this World War I soldier was murdered, or accidental death, whatever you want to call it. And as we left, and he must have been about 4 at this point, he starts waving to the corner of the room. And I was like, dude, who are you waving at? And he said, the nice soldier man in the corner. And I got him to describe it to me, and he described to me a World War I soldier to the finest detail. Now, the fact he was 4, the fact he has got learning difficulties, he can't lie. He can't.
Right.
And for him to be able to describe that, and, kids they've got that beautiful naivety about them. They don't question it. They see someone waving at them, they wave back.
They haven't learned yet that this can't exist, so for them it does.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. That would be a really kind of... Wow. Yeah. So we're saying he might have stored the bodies then in the pump room after he murdered them?
It's actually believed, because it's a very cool and dank room,
yeah,
that was it, that he didn't dispose of them immediately after the murders, that he let them lay in there. I mean, he knew his family would be gone for the weekend, so he had time. He wasn't rushed.
Yeah. Wow. Because the other thing I thought, when you were talking about all the meters start going mad once Joe was like calling out and trying to antagonise Baumeister, and I was quite pleased as I scrolled down the page. You actually said, no, if any one of you thinking the meters are going to go nuts because of things that are in this room, we checked all that, and we'd already done baseline readings to make sure that they wouldn't go bonkers for no reason in there.
And I'd already told Joe too that I was going to monitor conditions, so I had a thermal camera on us in the dark, an infrared camera, because, devil's advocate, maybe the guy is sending text. He's got a finger in his pocket, phone in his pocket. Maybe he's sending text. So we reviewed the footage, and again, didn't see any evidence of that either.
Wow, fascinating. So, I don't want to go into any more detail about those areas because people can read it in the book, but there is stuff I've not talked about that's in the book. So, and again, topless photo of Richard. I can't just imagine what you're going to write on that when I bring a copy of the book for you to sign, when you write your little messages in the books for me to find as I'm reading it.
I'll probably draw something anatomical on your copy.
You will, won't you? Yeah. I live for that, Richard. I live for that. So, we've talked about the pump room, the swimming pool. The other area I wanted to mention was the woods, because that's the other place. Obviously, that's where something in the region of 5,500 bones were found
Yeah, and
the
that's
first place?
that you're right, but that does include fragments. So the big problem with the way that he disposed of the bodies was he had two what they call bone piles or mulch piles, which were disposal sites. Now he put gasoline on a number of the sets of remains and tried to burn them. He tried crushing some, but what he didn't do was bury any of them, which annoyed the authorities no end. Because in terms of DNA evidence, it's important to understand that Herb Baumeister was never convicted of a single crime.
No.
And he may actually have gotten away with it, incredible as it sounds, because DNA evidence back then was extremely expensive. There were very few people willing to provide samples. So, I'm sorry, Governor, I don't know how all those dead men turned up in my yard. Was probably going to have been his defense. And he left the bodies out for years exposed to the elements. So rain, snow, wind, all that kind of stuff. And then the nocturnal critters of Fox Hollow Farm, including the foxes, after which the farm's named, took this stuff, they gnawed it, they scattered it far and wide. So what was left at the end was many, many fragments. A lot of this stuff was fragmentary. I mean, there were complete human bones as well in there, but you would find just sections of bones. And the last day when the police and the doctor from the University of Indiana, they thought that they had found and catalogued everything, and they were told by some neighbors, oh, you need to look in the creek, which borders, and they found it was lined with more bones coming down the side, including, they found things like arms that were still in handcuffs, so arm bones that were still cuffed. God. And so the investigation just kicked off all over again.
Because hasn't Rob found stuff as well?
Yeah, I mean, stuff still turns up there from time to time. And one of the most tragic things about this, we know that when it comes to a haunting, just from the literature of the paranormal, the fact that somebody didn't get a traditional Christian burial is often a motivator for that, isn't it? Well, these poor young men are never going to get one. The remains that are found were not buried. They're stored, I believe, in the archives at the university in Indianapolis. Yeah. They're never going to get any kind of traditional burial, and I think that plays into it.
Yeah, it could do. I mean, I know that the statistic you put in the book, I don't know if it's you wrote this or Rob, I can't remember, is that out of those 5,500 bones, they made at least 11 different left hands. So
yeah, I believe Rob's the guy that put that in.
Okay, so that could infer that there was at least 11 people in those woods. And that's the key. At
least he was very shrewd about targeting his victims, Penny. So he tried to find men whose families wouldn't miss them, and remembering how the attitude towards the gay community was in the 1990s. People said that, you know what, maybe they just moved on, or horrifically, people actually said, they're probably just dying of AIDS.
Yep.
I mean, how awful! You had a forgotten populace, and that was absolutely why Herb Baumeister got away with it, or largely why he got away with it for so long. That and the fact that they were all going to a very convenient place for disposal. Yeah.
I mean, as you say, from a personal perspective, these poor men, not only were they kind of ostracised by society because of their relationship choice, they were ostracised because, for those people who are too young to remember this, but the 80s and early 90s, it was the whole time when HIV and AIDS was seen as being, it was almost like the new plague, wasn't it? It was almost treated like, if you go near someone who's got this condition, you're going to die of it as well. And a lot of people, especially sort of very, I'd say, staunch heterosexuals, but you may get what I mean by that, people who weren't accepting of other choices, were like, it's the gays' fault, it's because they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, that's why they're all dying of this illness. And so you've got these poor men who couldn't be themselves for fear of being ostracised, were seen as almost easy pickings. I mean, you've just got to look at someone like Jeffrey Dahmer's cases as well, because he picked on gay men, didn't he?
He did.
And amongst other murderers, but he's the one that's just come to mind. And, at the end of the day, they were. I find it so tragic. I really genuinely find it absolutely tragic that these people were picked on because of the fact that society didn't really want to know. And I can't understand it myself, but I just, having grown up, obviously, we're the same age, we grew up in that time. I know how people who were gay, I mean, you know, heaven forbid someone told you they had HIV back then. You were almost told not to go anywhere near them.
Yeah, and it was a huge deal when I think Princess Diana first hugged a person with HIV or AIDS. Do you recall that?
Mm-hmm, I do.
And so Wes, who is a huge Princess Diana fan, I had to bring that up just for you. You're welcome. But it was seen as a truly remarkable event, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah, it was at the time. Regardless of what I thought of her, yes, she did a good thing for making people realise that you can comfort someone who's dying of AIDS without risking your life as well. And there's still misconceptions about it. I remember I had a client who I went to see him, and he turned around and told me he was HIV positive, and he'd understand if I didn't feel comfortable working with him. I was like, why would I not feel comfortable working with you? I'm not going, you know. But you know, he grew up with that whole sort of people thinking that if they would like almost sanitize their hands after being near them, you know, that kind of thing. Which, so yeah, it's. I just feel sorry for these men. I feel sorry for these men that they almost had to operate in the shadows for fear of.
Yeah, and they were truly forgotten. I mean,
yeah,
they finally realized that there was probably a serial killer working. The police, I mean, I don't want to make it sound as if they didn't do anything. They did position police officers in many of those bars, undercover agents. They knew something was going on, but it took them quite a while to figure it out. And really a big break in the case came. We can't overplay the work done by Virgil Vandergriff, a private investigator who was instrumental in tracking this down. The one victim that came forward that hadn't been killed said that he remembered being taken to a place called Somewhere Farm in a very rural area. Well, these were the days before Apple Maps or Google Maps. So you had all these miles of roads that had to be searched. And it's also kind of interesting that his testimony was taken somewhat, I think, with a grain of salt. And Herb also was a sporadic killer. There would be months go by while the cops were staking out these bars, and he would not go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was kind of the perfect storm for him. He did it for years and years. And we will never know how long and how many he finally killed. No,
because even when he killed himself in Canada on, isn't it Lake, I don't know how to pronounce it, Lake Huron?
Yeah, Lake Huron.
He didn't put anything in the suicide note about it. He never admitted what he'd done. Never admitted how many men.
And it was kind of a nudge, wink, wink in the suicide note, because he actually put in there, he signed it, the Herb Baumeister, almost as if he knew that there would be notoriety coming. But never said anything about murders, blamed it all on his failing business and marriage, and yet was fully aware. And I always like to talk about the squirrel video, which I talk about in the book, and I'd love to discuss with you and your listeners, Penny.
Yeah.
If you Google the phrase Herb Baumeister squirrel, you'll see an old news story, and once you know about what happened at Fox Hollow, this will absolutely send shivers down your spine. One of the road painting crews came by, and there was a dead squirrel at the side of the road, and so rather than move it, they kind of drove over it and spray painted over the squirrel or around it, I forget which. Either way, they didn't move the squirrel and then do the job properly, and Herb was so enraged that he called, lodged complaints, tried to get these guys fired. It was a local news story. And so the news crew came out to interview him and photographed said dead squirrel. And so he's talking about how this poor creature, this poor, precious thing, was treated with such disrespect by the road crews. And where he's standing in this video, he's in the driveway of Fox Hollow Farm. Behind him in the woods, not 200 feet away, are the mouldering remains of his victims.
Yep.
And so he's just lecturing, he's preaching, and he looks... Have you seen the video, Penny?
I haven't seen the video, but I have seen stills from it.
He looks like a bank manager. He looks, he doesn't look like some kind of monster. He just looks like this perfectly ordinary suit and tie kind of guy that you would buy insurance from, or ask for a loan. And it's just chilling to think that he's on this, rant, how terrible it is, what's been done to this poor creature, while the bodies of those poor boys are right behind him.
Yep.
And that was his MO. He was getting off on it.
Yep.
That was absolutely his personality. I'm getting one over on all of you. None of you know what I've done.
Yep. No, he's. I think it's a shame he took his own life and never stood up, got sort of confronted for what he'd done. But it's times like these that I do wish and hope there is a hell, because there's certain people I'd like to see in it, if there is, and he's one of them. Because the more I read about him, reading your book, reading up on some of the notes of what he did as well for preparing for this show, he whether he was mentally ill, I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. Whether all serial killers have some kind of mental illness, I don't know. I know that's one of the things they suggest it could be. It's something wired together wrong in their brains. But he was evil. He was evil, and yet he managed to masquerade as a reputable, sort of well-respected business owner, which is the most dangerous kind of evil. So, thank you for writing that book. It is a cracking read. It's available now, isn't it? It is pretty much everywhere. Sort of hard copy and Kindle, wherever you are in the world. I would recommend it. It is written in a very, very respectful way. I know that's something you mention in it that you wanted to make sure was done, that it wasn't glamorising what he did at all. It's telling a story, and it's alike with a lot of these kind of murders, whether it be the very famous sort of Jack the Rippers or the not so well known Herb Baumeisters. It's making sure that victims' names are mentioned as well, and it's not all about the glory of the serial killer. Because I know you mentioned a funny comment to me before we came on air about all white women seem to love a serial killer. And you probably, I've had this conversation with friends of mine who almost idolised Jack the Ripper, and it's like, why? He was disgusting. Why would you idolise him? I'm more interested in what makes them do what they do. But I certainly wouldn't idolise one. And I know I've had this conversation with Wes as well, being a corrections officer, prison officer, that he can never understand why young women would write to serial killers in prison and want a relationship with them.
No, he and I were speaking about this just the other day, and it's mystifying, isn't it?
Yeah. I'd be interested more from almost like, the television show Mindhunter. I'd be more interested in it from a psychological perspective. Why did they do it? What makes them tick? Why did they think that was an acceptable thing to do? That's what I'm interested in. I certainly don't find them attractive or sexy or anything like that. I don't understand that. I do understand the psychological interest in it, but that's as far as it goes. So thank you for writing this book. Thank you for mentioning these victims and giving them a name. Appreciate that, and it's a very interesting book. Get hold of a copy if you can. I'm sure Richard doesn't mind if you put it on Kindle or if you buy a hard copy. Just read the work, read it, and you'll see. Or
go to your library.
Or go to your library, yeah, and you'll see 3 different writers in there who are all incredibly good writers. Whether it be Cammie's forward, whether it be the words that Rob put in, or whether it be the words that Richard put in, you get a slightly different sort of style of writing from each of them. But they all, it's a great read. It's a great read, and just be sort of cognizant of the fact this is a true story. This isn't kind of elaborated sort of, we saw a man walking around in a lumberjack shirt, therefore he must have been. No, these young men were murdered. There's no ifs, buts or maybes about it. They were murdered. It's not one of those stories where you go into a place, especially in the UK, and they say, there was a load of killings done there in 1526, and you can't find any proof of it. This is real. This really, really did happen, and there's evidence to show that. So, yeah, it's a very sombre but cracking read. Is that a good way of putting it?
I can't tell you if it's a cracking read, but it's a very somber book, and it's a very somber place. It's rare that I'm glad to be done with a case, completely. But I would be happy to never go back to Fox Hollow Farm again.
But just to sort of before we mention something else you've got coming up in the UK soon, which I'm going to mention. And don't worry, it's nothing. It's something we were talking about. I want to mention to people who've expressed an interest in this. Is it true that Fox Hollow is being ripped down?
No, it's not true at all.
Right.
It is true that Rob has sold, I think, 10 acres. Rob and Vicky have sold 10 acres of Fox Hollow for development, so they will be building houses on the grounds.
Okay.
But it's an 18-acre property, though.
Yeah. So one of the things I'd read was that one of the reports I read that I got sent, I can't remember who by, was that Fox Hollow was being ripped down and therefore there was going to never be another investigation there again.
So what you're correct about is that the Rob, several times a year, I think 3 times a year, 4 times a year, allowed a public investigation with Troy Taylor, who, great guy, very credible investigator and writer, and he would allow Troy to take in a group of public investigators, and he brought in investigators like Lisa Crick, who really know the place, so it was a chance for people to do some research on their own. My understanding is that Rob has been told to cease and desist.
Okay.
And so is no longer allowed to run those events. So Fox Hollow is being shut down, but not ripped down.
Okay. But then again, he might want someone to come and stay to help pay the rent for that week. Or house sit.
I certainly couldn't advocate that, but who knows?
Well, the other thing I just want to mention is Richard has had a show on in the US for a while that I have been plaguing him about. When is this going to be on in the UK? When is this going to be on the UK? And this is Paranormal 911. To translate, basically Paranormal 999 for us in the UK.
Right.
And we've got it coming at the end of the month, haven't we?
We do. First season. We just finished shooting the second season, 3 days ago. I just got back from Toronto. And the first season, which is already aired in the US and Canada, has been slated for Really TV. On the, as I'm told, Monday the 21st.
21st of October. It's due to start in their 13 Nights of Horror or 13 Nights of Fright or whatever they call that, when they play loads and loads of paranormal stuff. I am so excited to be watching it, and so that I can sit there with my 10-year-old who's really into all of this and point out, go, I know him, I know them, because he never believes me. And I'm really excited to see it because I've been looking forward to seeing that one since I knew you worked on it before. So yes, you can catch up. Did you get topless in this one though, Richard?
I did. I do not get my kid off in this one. Unfortunately, I tried and they called the police. So.
Well, thank you ever so much for being a cracking guest again. It's always a pleasure, never a chore, chatting to you, Mr. Estep.
Always a pleasure, Penny. And remember, try not to be too afraid of things.
Are you going to nick my jingle? You're going to nick my
I've
jingle?
always
No,
wanted
you can't
to do
say
it.
it as well as me. You can't say it as well as me.
Nobody can.
Go on. It's have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Sleep tight.
Sleep tight.
And don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
And don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
And on that note... You enjoyed that, didn't you? And on that note...
That's Shatner-esque, mate. Shatner-esque.
And on that note, guys, I will speak to you all next week. I'm going to be talking to, well, we've mentioned his name a few times already, Barry John. And we're actually going to be talking about the history and mystery of Coombe Abbey, where Sage Paracon will be taking place in a few weeks. So if you haven't got your tickets for it, go and grab your tickets for Sage Paracon. Have a read of the blog I did on Coombe Abbey as well. There might be some facts that you didn't know. And then wait to hear what Barry and I talk about, some of the ghosts and ghoulies associated with the place. Well, it's a good night from me. It's a good night from him. You meant to say good night there, Richard. Until next week, guys, thank you ever so much for listening. My name's Penny, this is Haunted Histories on Parasearch Radio, and I'll catch you all soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.